Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Pam Bro, NASA's CEO, and I am so grateful that you're joining us for today's webinar, which is Leading in the Face of Disaster. We all know that unexpected disasters are often devastating for communities, and the arts community is certainly no exception to that. Whether we're thinking about weather and climate disasters like floods and fires or hurricanes, or whether we're thinking about other kinds of emergencies in the aftermath of catastrophe, there are very important roles state arts agencies can play, especially related to helping the arts community connect to resources and pertinent information needed so that they can begin their recovery. Unfortunately, we're seeing so many weather disasters and climate disasters. They've become numerous, they've become intense, and it's difficult to even name all those most recently impacted. Top of mind for me at the moment are our friends in Florida because of recent storms, our friends and colleagues in Vermont due to this year's unprecedented flooding, certainly our friends in Hawaii because of such devastating fires in Maui. And this very week, our friends in Massachusetts as a result of catastrophic flooding. And certainly the current hurricane season steadily making headlines these days isn't helping any of us rest easily. In each of these examples, state arts agencies are leading and going about the work of understanding and illuminating the impact of the disasters on the arts, right? And doing the work of connecting the arts community to needed resources. The participants in today's discussion all have considerable on-the-job training, and I'm so grateful they're here to share the kinds of observations and learnings they wish they themselves knew about before having to respond to significant disasters. And so I think we'll all learn from them today. Today's speakers include Emily Moses from the Kentucky Arts Council. Emily has managed the twin disasters of Western Kentucky tornadoes and East Kentucky flooding. Maida Owens is also joining us from the Louisiana Division of the Arts, and she will focus attention on something referred to as slow onsets or slow disasters. And that might be new language for some of you. It's pretty new for me as well. And her observations there are really important for state arts agencies. Also joining us, Mary Eileen Forat from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. Significant experience a few years back related to Superstorm Sandy, and that's informed their work in other catastrophes. And also, last but certainly not least, Gary Gibbs, Texas Commission on the Arts and former chair of the NASA Board of Directors. Gary has experience in this space from several notable disasters. Front of mind for me was very notable that thunderstorm Imelda, not too many years ago, created extreme flooding conditions. I remember one of the quotes of 43 inches of rain, and that was devastating, particularly in Houston. And he and his team had to navigate that. So I want to welcome and thank all of our panelists for today. And I'd like us to begin with some introductory comments from Emily from Kentucky. And after Emily's presentation, we'll then move into a conversation with our panelists. So glad you're all here. And Emily, please take it away.
Thank you, Pam. And I'm going to take a minute to share my screen here. So if you'll all bear with me for just a sec. There we go. Hopefully you can see me okay. As Pam said, my name is Emily Moses, and I'm the Executive Staff Advisor for the Kentucky Arts Council. And I've been with the Arts Council for 10 years now, but I've only been involved with this work since 2021. I want to say first a big thank you to NASA for hosting this session, which is kind of a culminating event for the Kentucky Arts Council's 6-part series about emergencies, disasters, and the arts that we started in April. So we're thrilled to be able to have this opportunity to talk with our fellow state arts agencies about these very important issues that are facing us all. So let's see, am I advancing? There we go. There's a great need in communities across the country to address the issues around emergencies and disasters that affect the arts field. As it's National Preparedness Month, it seems extra fitting that this conversation is happening at this time. The Kentucky Arts Council became involved in this work following historic and catastrophic long-track tornadoes that left in their path expansive devastation in Western Kentucky on the night of December 10th, 2021. And this was the first disaster that the Kentucky Arts Council had responded to as an agency, beyond providing minimal funding and some resources to artists in the aftermath of disasters or emergency. This was a large scale emergency. An entire town was mostly wiped out, and there were arts organizations located there that disappeared. What we didn't know, of course, was at that time that 7 months later, we would be in the exact same shape again on the opposite side of the state. On July 27th, 7 months later, in the days to follow, again, historic and mass flooding known as 1,000-year flood happened in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky, causing much devastation in the region. Here's just a little map so that you can see the great swath of area that the disasters covered. If you look at the left-hand tip of Kentucky and look all the way over at the right hand, you're talking about a 7-hour drive. So you can imagine across that entire area that there has been major effects of both of these storms. And these are counties where we, a lot of them are where our operating support grantees are located. So in both instances, there were arts organizations that were completely destroyed or had damage to physical structures, archives, collections, artwork, all gone in an instant. The lives and livelihoods of hundreds of artists were affected by lost property, homes, studios, equipment, supplies, vehicles, finished work, works in progress, gone in an instant. And their communities that stood proud one day were forever changed the next. So there's an extensive need for resources to navigate the aftermath of these disasters for the field. Because we had never responded to a disaster before, we at the Arts Council didn't really know where to start or how. Luckily, what we found is there are people who work in this space every day who were available to help us and to guide us. I'm going to take a few minutes to share some information about how we moved ahead, share resources important for you to know about, and give some general tips and information about things to consider when you're deciding how to navigate what's coming your way. So here's the first bit, and this is probably the best advice that I could give any state arts agency or any community even that's responding, arts community that's responding to a disaster, is when a disaster emergency occurs, you must take an overview assessment of the situation. It is essential for several reasons, and it will help you organize your response. You'll go back to it time and time and time again. You have to know what happened and to whom. You need to know who needs help and what kind of help is needed. This information can help you connect people with those valuable resources. I can't overstate how important an assessment is when it comes to seeking funding of any sort. As we know, data speaks volumes, and an assessment allows you to collect some data along the way, even though it is very difficult following the aftermath of disaster. It is evidence And we know that that speaks volumes. So, as I do, that unfortunately, oftentimes we have to prove that our field is relevant and that people that work in our field deserve support the same way as those in other fields, like the business community. This information gives you concrete evidence that artists and arts organizations need support following disasters. Trust that you need this information. Also note, it is a living document and is a great way to stay in future contact with those in the affected areas so you and others who offer assistance can get in touch with them. You're going to be asked for this information in various forms time and time again. And for instance, FEMA is really interested in this information. Even if it's not in the beginning, they will be interested in it later. Foundations are interested in this information, and other funders are interested in this information. The best thing I can tell you is to get it together in some form. It'll help inform your decisions moving forward. And for those of you who have been around for a while, I want you to know that originally this information about taking an assessment came to me from the wonderful Andy Matthews, who was just about to retire from the NEA when the tornado happened in Kentucky. So that's the first thing to do. Now, here's the first call to make, or in many cases, the first call to answer. If you're not familiar with NCAPR, which is the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response, I would suggest you putting getting familiar with them at the top of your list. If there is a large-scale emergency or disaster in your state, NCAPR offers valuable resources and guidance to help you in your response. NCAPR works in tandem with multiple nonprofits and service organizations around the country who respond to arts emergencies and disasters. It's kind of like a one-stop shop when it comes to finding help navigating the aftermath of a disaster. In addition to helping organizations prepare for disaster, which is another aspect of the work we need to focus on, and I'll touch on in just a bit. One of the great things about NCAPR, usually when a disaster occurs, they will reach out to you to offer assistance. I would also suggest that you reach out to them as soon as you can. There are things that they can assist with, like coordinating calls that are very important for those in the disaster areas, connecting people affected with important resources, like grants, providing information on important issues related to response and recovery, and much, much more. We worked with NCAPR twice, and artists and arts organizations were both very grateful for the support that they received. And they also offer a great support system for you as arts responders in navigating this sometimes difficult terrain, which does take its toll on you as a human being. So these are some other folks that you need to know, and I've included here contact information that I'm sure can be shared with you in some format. So Jan Newcomb and Molly Quinlan Hayes, who a lot of you may know from her previous work in the state arts agency and regional arts organizations field, are the two folks at NCAPR who you'll want to be in touch with. I'm going to briefly go over some of these other organizations. FEMA, who you would be in contact with, is the Heritage Emergency National Task Force. And it's a partnership of 42 national service organizations and federal agencies created to protect cultural heritage following natural disasters and other emergencies. Lori Foley is the person there who you want to be in touch with. Performing Arts Readiness, Tom Clarison is a genius, and you should get to know him prior to anything happening in your state. He's a wealth of information about arts and humanities and can connect you with an abundance of resources. They also have planning grants, and they have other online resources to build preparedness plans. FAIC is the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation. It supports conservation education, research, and outreach activities that increase understanding of global cultural heritage. Again, they also have grants and other opportunities following disaster and also for preparedness issues. And then many of you are familiar with Surf Plus. I would encourage you to get extra intimate with Surf Plus, because I think, especially in responding to disasters, there are many opportunities that they have to help provide funding to individual artists, which you will find, unfortunately, is scarce following a disaster. That's an area that we need to work on, helping individual artists. Here's some other folks that you also want to be in touch with. Some of our regular partners, like the NEA and NASA. Keep these folks aware of your situation, what's going on. You can do it through email. I would suggest a long conversation in the beginning, but keep folks apprised of what's happening as you progress. You never know what connections are going to be made, what's going to come of that. Let's talk about FEMA super quickly. FEMA is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and where does it sit? Right, wherever it wants. So that aside, let's talk for just a second about how FEMA helps our field, because at the end of the day, that's what's important, and that's what we're trying to do following a disaster. FEMA is our partner, and that partnership is important. So you want to be ready. And again, that assessment comes into play when FEMA shows up, or when FEMA contacts you and wants to work with you. You would hear from the cultural folks with FEMA. There are no specific arts field related FEMA workers. So we fall under the cultural and cultural heritage area. That's another point that needs some advocacy if we'd like to talk about that further as a field. HENTF is a partnership between the Smithsonian and FEMA. And we've got a webinar on that if you would like to see it. It's on our Arts Council YouTube page. There's a few of them who serve the whole country, and they work very hard, and they're in constant contact with you. You can email them or call them at any time when a disaster occurs. They can assist organizations that have been affected in different ways through the Public Assistance Program, which is a difficult program of FEMA's to navigate. Individual artists through the Individual Assistance Program. Another group that we found very helpful to work with was the FEMA Philanthropic Advisors. They can be helpful in connecting you with various grant and funding and project opportunities. The main thing to know about FEMA, and it really, in my opinion, is the main thing to know, is you better meet the deadlines. You got to meet them. Your people have to meet the deadlines. It is rare that FEMA will walk it back and allow you to apply after the fact. It does happen, they say, but it's better to meet the deadline up front and know that as long as you meet the deadline, if you get denied by FEMA for any reason, and you will, then you just go back again. And you continue to appeal those denials until somebody at FEMA says yes, right? That comes exactly from FEMA. Okay, so you want to take some steps now to plan your response. If you're interested in responding, not all state arts agencies respond in very specific ways. Maybe like we did with providing some information, like we did way before we ever got involved in anything, or maybe not at all. It's okay, obviously. We all have different needs and need to do what's best for us. I would suggest, in the very least, putting together some information that you would be able to share with your constituents following a disaster, even if it's just a list of possible resources where they may be able to turn to for funding and for other assistance that they need, because you'll find that the assistance needed is quite broad and intense. Another thing you can do is familiarize yourself with your state's emergency management agency and be on their radar. They're the direct liaison with FEMA when FEMA comes in. And so you'll want to make sure that they're aware that you exist and that your field exists and that your folks need assistance just like everybody else does. It's easy for the arts to be left out. I've seen it happen twice now. The second time, not as bad as the first time, but it does happen. So if we make some of these relationships now, we'll be better off in the future. And there are other folks on this call who are very experienced with that. Find your state partners, those who you work with regularly, who have serve like constituencies that you do. Have some conversations now about if when things fall apart for our folks, how are we going to respond together? You'll be miles ahead of where we were when these things happened to us, when we saw archives being completely destroyed. And I just want to throw in that great quote from Louisiana drag queen Chi Chi DuVane: "If you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready." Here's a couple of things. I'm going to go through these fast because I'm running out of time. Things for you to consider as you think about being in this space. There's no national dedicated funding source to address response, recovery, mitigation, or preparedness. In sitting on multiple NCAPR calls with multiple states, we all have the same questions after things occur. And one of our major questions is about funding. We've got to think about this now. There's also no comprehensive current national data. And as I mentioned earlier, we know that data works wonders for moving our causes ahead, as we saw with many of our creative industry studies across the United States. Advocacy is super necessary. Can you talk to your state advocacy organization about getting involved in this work in some way? If you want to talk about that a little bit later, I can tell you what we're doing. We have 5 webinars on our Kentucky Arts Council YouTube channel. Almost all of the people, if not all of them, who I've mentioned earlier are featured in one of these webinars. Wealth of information. Thank you to all the state arts agencies who have participated in those and come. We've been thrilled to see you. What can we do together? I think we can do a lot as a field, should we choose to. I think that these are conversations that we should continue to have. They're quite important. And if it hasn't happened to you yet, you should just know it's gonna happen to you at some point. And it's unfortunate, but that is likely the case. I believe in the power collectively of the State Arts Agency Network. And I think that we could actually make big differences here. And that's it. If you want to contact me to talk about any of this further, here's my contact information, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thanks so much for really managing this work on behalf of Kentucky. And if that's not backbreaking and difficult enough, really supplying the inspiration for more people to be in this conversation with a series of webinars, with your work with NCAPR, that has really inspired, I think, the pre-conference that folks at Grantmakers in the Arts are going to experience this fall. And I think this is a conversation that can also lead into NASA's next assembly in Puerto Rico next fall, so fall next year, because I mean that's an important place to consider these issues, and certainly their agency at ISEPE has some models that I think would translate really well and importantly for the state arts agency field. But thank you so much. And now I'd like to move into bringing other panelists into the conversation. I am going to invite Gary and Mary Eileen in that order to share, what you wish state arts agencies knew about responding to disasters. What do you most want your colleagues in state arts agencies to know about responding? And I'll begin with Gary.
Thanks, Pam. First of all, let me say that was an excellent presentation by Emily. She covered so much of all of the work that goes into dealing with disasters. So I'm going to try to just offer a couple of practical tips that I learned through experience, basically. And the first one is when a disaster occurs, you have to understand, and I'm not an expert in this area, but people are traumatized. And so when you reach out to arts organizations, the individuals that work in those organizations, the artists that earn their living, they may have experienced personal disaster as well. Their homes, so the concerns that they have don't rely just with their business, with the creative industry, but with their own personal life. So you have to be sensitive to that. And one of the most urgent things that needs to happen, as Emily mentioned, is that you have to get in contact with them. And that's difficult when a disaster hits, because in most cases, they're not sitting in their office able to answer their email or answer their office phone. So one of the things that I learned is that you need to have alternate ways of getting in touch with these folks, which may mean someone's private cell phone number that you might reach out to them, and then they can connect you to other people in the community that you're just unable to reach at the time. Another hint I would provide is that this is all kind of foreign territory to certainly our arts organizations, but even to state arts agency staff. That's why this webinar is so important. And so even the language that's used in disaster recovery, particularly by FEMA, and Emily mentioned this, is really quite different than the language we're accustomed to working in. And so in meetings, especially phone conversations with multiple people participating, I always had another staff member on those calls with me, just to have another set of ears hearing what's going on. It was really, really important because, again, it's all new kind of information. It's difficult to process. People's minds are literally elsewhere because of the demands that are upon them. So it's very helpful to have those extra set of ears. And then I can talk about some of the other things later, but I'll pause for now. Pam.
Thanks so much, Gary. Thanks for naming all of that. Thanks for naming the traumatized nature of the traumatizing nature of the experience, not just for your stakeholders and communities, but your staff. That is, I really want to put an exclamation point on that. It took me a good few days to understand post-Katrina in Louisiana back in 2005 that we as a staff were in shock and experiencing the trauma too, even though we weren't in the middle of the storm. And it wasn't until someone with 9/11 experience from New York said, okay, you're in shock. You're still in shock. And we've got to get you past that so that our agency can get strategic, right, about our work. So that shock and that trauma is experienced by everyone in the state, first of all, whether or not they were personally directly impacted, right? Certainly the highest level of trauma is from those that are directly impacted, but your team as well. Your team as well, because chances are, people in these communities that have taken a direct impact, and that's a part of the trauma too. Mary Eileen, hi. What would you like colleagues to know?
Well, I would make sure that you are at any table where relief or recovery is being talked about, even if you think you don't belong there, because otherwise the arts aren't going to be represented. And whether in a big disaster, long-term recovery groups get set up to meet unmet needs, that's a place where you need to be. You need to go, if there are FEMA meetings in your area, go there, learn as much as you can. And, it just sort of underscores the importance of the better prepared your state arts agency is, and the more you know beforehand, the better able you are to help your organizations. And I think emergency preparedness is just part of good management of arts organizations. It doesn't always hit the priority because there's so many things that arts organizations are dealing with. But I think at the New Jersey Council, our experience with Hurricane Sandy put us in a much better position when we had to deal with COVID. And if you're prepared in general, it helps you prepare for both big emergencies or crises as well as little ones that, you know, might hit just a certain town or a certain region or maybe just one arts organization.
Thanks so much.
And if I may, that is just such a great point from Mary Eileen about COVID, because those things I was talking about communicating, I think, with us all experiencing COVID, we've learned different ways to communicate with the field. And so that was a great learning experience for us as well.
Good point, Gary. Thank you. Thanks. Earlier, when I introduced MEDA, you heard me refer to slow onset or slow disasters, which is maybe fairly new language for all of us or many of us. MEDA, can you tell us a little bit about what that means and how it's impacting your work in Louisiana?
Sure. While all of you definitely have emergency preparedness state agencies, you may or may not have agencies that are starting to think about what I've been focused on. And that's the what's called slow onset disasters. That's the sea level rise, the droughts, the thawing permafrost that doesn't trigger FEMA emergency preparedness responses. But FEMA is changing. They do have what they call the risk management funds. And so that and HUD are talking about relocation. But why I got so involved in all this is I realized that with Louisiana's very dramatic coastal erosion and the people moving away from the coast, and eventually this will be almost the entire southern part of the state. It's pretty dramatic what's predicted to happen. Well, what happens to our culture in this process? We are definitely going to be facing massive cultural disruption, and people are already moving away since Katrina in 2005. It's definitely accelerated, and it continues to accelerate. So our state happens to be one of the few that actually has a master plan for this type of work, because we need it. We're one of the worst. We have one of the worst scenarios in the country, but it will be impacting everyone because the people being displaced have to go somewhere, and they be coming to a neighborhood near you. And so what I'm trying to do is raise awareness about this. And while it can be challenging to get people to talk about emergency prep for disasters, it's even harder to get people to think about relocation and migration issues. So that's what I've been focused on.
MEDA, just a little bit more along those lines. What would you perceive as key roles for state arts agencies in this work?
Well, what I have found is that through the Bayou Culture Collaborative, we created this network and a way for people to communicate on a level that's never been available. And we focus on what's called the human dimension, the people, and not just the physical environment. And it turns out a lot of environmentalists are just as concerned about the culture as the culture people. Actually, they show up more than the culture people. But we are looking at ways to assist people in relocating and retaining their culture. So there's a lot of dialogue going on right now. One of the ways that's that arts can really play a role in all this is the toolkit that you already have. That there are strategies to help newcomers get integrated in with the long-term residents. And you can look at immigration research, you can look at all kinds of arts activities and the artist community engagement projects. All of that can help alleviate the conflict that is bound to happen when you have this much movement in the country. It's predicted to be twice as much as the Great Migration North out of the South and the West, the Dust Bowl movement West in half the time. So, and this is already starting, you know, that this is not something in the future. It's happening now. Different areas are affected more than others, though.
Well, and thank you for helping to get that on everyone's radar. Really appreciated. So let's move back to funding because, you know, as Emily mentioned in her early remarks, you know, that's always earliest on the minds of state arts agencies facing disaster, right? Where do you find the funding to help your stakeholders? How do you get that done, right? And it's not easy because, you know, there's not consistent, ongoing, easy to access dollars just ready for the arts community in response to these disasters. So I will ask Emily and then Mary Eileen and Gary to share how you actually found funding for in response to your disasters, if you did and how you did.
So it was really hard work. It was very, very hard. And I'll tell you what a lot of it came down to for us was having that assessment in play, because we could whip out that information every time we were asked for it. We also worked in tandem with some other agencies. So within the cabinet we're structured in is also the cultural heritage, the SHPO's office. And so we were able to work with them a lot too, to kind of see where our interests intersected, to really beef up a presentation and a formal request from foundations, especially community foundations, especially because that's where a lot of money is directed when things happen. They're directed to community foundations. So it's good. Actually, it's good to go ahead and try to build some of those relationships now. We were also able to do two things with our National Endowment for the Arts funding. We were able to secure some additional funding from the NEA, and we used our assessment again to build that proposal. Just being super duper transparent, we asked for way more than we knew we could ever receive, but we assigned a actual dollar figure. I mean, it was really how much was needed to each part of the ask. So we were able to get some funding there. And then again, through the FEMA philanthropy office, they actually connected, we didn't get direct funding from them. They connected our projects with funders. So that was very important. And the Community Foundation did the same thing. So other partners mentioned, like the FAIC, the Smithsonian, some other folks, they did things like send in PPE following the floods, especially, so that folks working in archives recovery had the right equipment and gear. So there are lots of ways that that people want to help you. Then there are resources there. And also, again, Surf Plus was amazing with our individual artists. And so building those relationships with those organizations that respond allows us to say, hey, I have 20 artists in Eastern Kentucky who need assistance, and can you help them? And what can we do to help facilitate? So those are just a few of the things that we did.
Really important observations. Thank you. You know, I want to put an exclamation point on the community foundations and the fact that a lot of dollars go directly to them in the aftermath of storms. You know, I had a great conversation with our friends from Hawaii recently, after the fires in Maui. And I think I see John Johnson on the line now, but he gave voice to their pre-existing strong relationship with a particular community foundation that's receiving a lot of the funding. And that pre-existing relationship is something that they can leverage into support for the arts, because that relationship helped to make the community foundation more of an active partner with the arts prior to disaster. So really important point. Mary Eileen, how did y'all find resources?
Well, with Hurricane Sandy, it came mostly from the foundation end, and again, a community foundation that we actually didn't have too many arts organizations that were destroyed, thank goodness. But what the funding really went to was to help respond to the trauma that people in the community were feeling. So that was great. With COVID, we were able to partner with foundations to start the New Jersey Arts and Culture Recovery Fund. And that was a great success. That brought in a lot of funds from different foundations, corporate and government as well, and went out quickly. They were able to get money out quickly. And then working with the Economic Development Authority in the state to say, these are businesses, both the individual artists and the arts organizations, and they need support just like, all the other businesses that need support. So that helped us advocate for, and then leverage funds that we could never have come up with on our own.
Thanks so much, Mary Eileen. Gary, how about you? How did Texas find dollars for the arts?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've had to do this several times because of all the disasters that we've had during my tenure here. Sometimes I've been successful getting special funds from the NEA, from national foundations, from local Texas-based foundations, from even state government funds, but not always. It just depended. And I think that's one of the things that Emily brought out, that there's no, and you mentioned too, Pam, there's no consistency about where to go for this type of emergency funding. And it just varies from year to year, depending on the priority of the philanthropic resource. If I could also talk about, once you get the dollars, how important it is to act quickly with those dollars you get. And so however you're going to grant them out, make it the least burdensome process possible, because the field is already suffering from the trauma of the event. And so you don't want to add to that, even though I know we're all bureaucratic, you don't want to add even more strings and ropes to that, because as has been mentioned, if you're dealing with FEMA, that's a full-time job right there. So try to get the dollars out as quickly as possible, and expect that reporting requirements will be difficult, because especially if you give it to individual artists, many of these artists will have never received a grant before, and don't have the, that's not the way they operate. So just be prepared to do a lot of hand holding.
That is so important, Gary. There's so many levels of trauma in response to a major disaster. And certainly, I can remember, just to your point about really finding the ways to be as friendly as possible and user-friendly as possible in grant applications with folks, because otherwise you're adding to another level of trauma to the equation, right? People are waiting on FEMA funding. They're trying to figure out where they're going to live 3 days from now and 3 weeks from now if their homes were destroyed. And so really standing up to find the best ways to ensure quick funding and to ensure that your processes aren't adding trauma to the equation are really important for the arts community. Important for any community, but the arts community where we are concerned. I can remember Division of the Arts team members in Louisiana post-Katrina taking applications over the phone, right? From people living in their cars. So there was no way it was possible even to have those folks get a paper application, download a paper application, fill it out, turn it in. And so, you know, the staff took on a great deal of that in the spirit of trying not to extend the trauma. I'm going to ask one question of Mary Eileen, then I'll check in with you, Eric, about whether there are questions in the queue. But Mary Eileen, it seems that Sandy really changed the nature of your agency's work in emergency management. And so I'm wondering how you might recommend state arts agencies establish their own roles regarding disaster response and disaster recovery.
Sure. Well, I think first, every state arts agency should designate one staff person, you know, with all their hats, give them another hat and say, you're the point person for emergency preparedness. And doesn't mean you have all the answers, but it means that you learn, you could look at Emily's presentation and learn where you need to go for resources. I think that's critical, similar to having an ADA coordinator, you know, somebody who's thinking about it. And then also in Emily's presentation, talking about bringing those partners together. In New Jersey, after Hurricane Sandy, that led us to develop the New Jersey Cultural Alliance for Response. So see if there's an alliance for response in your state or region and connect with them. Many of them, I think ours was the first one to specifically have an arts component. And that's really important. Bring those partners together, meet, you know, periodically, just come together, bring in somebody from your state Office of Emergency Management, take the designated state arts agency person, take FEMA's training, free training. I think it's the 101 gets you into that incident command, whatever it is, system. And and as Gary said, it's different language, but you need to know what emergency managers are thinking about and how they coordinate, and get yourself a seat at that table. So now we actually literally have a seat at the New Jersey Office of Emergency Management Command Center if there is a big disaster. So I think those are some of the first steps that you can take, and be happy to talk to anybody offline, you know, about what they can do.
Having that seat at your state's broader emergency management function is so important. And those aren't just, you know, magically handed to state arts agencies, right? It's clear that your work really, or you placed your work on the radar of state officials to the extent that they realize the benefit of ensuring that there's an arts chair there, where all the big decisions are being made and all of the big responses are being strategized. So that's nice work. Thanks, Mary Eileen. Eric, are there questions in the queue? And if they're not, that's okay too.
We actually have a couple questions. One is, I think, a little broader question that for all the panelists and Pam yourself as well. Is there a usual role that a state arts agency plays during disaster recovery? So is there somewhere where you can start preparing and kind of clicking in is how I'm reading that?
I'm happy to get us rolling if you like. I'm going to do an easy one. So a typical role and a good role that's an entry point into managing disaster is the role of making the right information, effective information available to arts communities impacted, right? One way, you've heard a lot, right? You've seen a really thorough presentation from Emily, and if she had an hour to do it, it would be even more thorough. There's a lot out there to navigate. So helping provide the resources that hit home quickly and effectively for the arts community, a really important role for state arts agencies. So for example, diving a little deeper than say NCAPER, we know NCAPER is there, the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response, and their website has a number of resources. But the first resource I would guide arts stakeholders to, and it's on the NCAPER site, and it is the field guide. It's an arts field guide for federal disaster relief, right? It was created by NCAPER, funded by the National Endowment for the Arts and Mellon Foundation, and FEMA was a participant in the development of the piece. And so it's a really well done piece that's customized for the arts community. So again, providing the most relevant information to lead people to resources is an important role a state arts agency can take on. And I would say that's low-hanging fruit. And our other panelists may have some additional observations.
Hey, Maida, I know you have something to say about like focusing on culture when people are already dealing with so much.
Yeah, what I've learned is what gets their attention the best about, like with people living out of their cars and such, why should we be worried about culture? And I've found the response that's been most effective, and I've been told that this really resonates with scientists and such, is that culture provides a sense of well-being and helps people cope. So helping, whether it's a tornado or sea level rise, helping people support their culture will help in the long run, and that culture also provides a sense of community and connections. And so that I've said this in quite a few different settings, and the sense of well-being, especially for the mental health angles too, because after disaster, people are walking around like zombies, and the mental health issues are profound. So what we are in a position to really help people stay grounded, stay connected, in profound ways.
Thank you, Maida. I know that, for instance, and I'm sure we'll hear more from Puerto Rico next year, but I know, for instance, Puerto Rico arranged for performances and movie nights for people who were displaced to help take their mind off of everything that was going on, even for just a few hours, and it really did help their mental health. So I think that's an incredible point you just made there, Maida. Gary, Emily, Mary Eileen, do you have anything to add about kind of what a usual role for a state arts agency is when dealing with a disaster? Mary Eileen.
Well, I think just remembering that art helps. It really does. And just as Maida says, it can be incredibly important for a community that's trying to recover, even just giving a little respite from the hard work that they're doing, trying to recover. It really is critical. And yeah, I think that we're in a good position where we can help our arts groups and artists be prepared, because the more prepared you are, the more likely you're going to be able to survive any kind of an emergency. So it's really critical to think about it beforehand so that we don't lose our arts and culture.
Great. And Emily, I saw you unmute almost the exact same time.
Yeah, I don't know about a usual role. I think it can be minimal. I think it can be larger. I think a really good place for you to start is to ask yourself, your agency, I don't mean this to be flippant, but what are we willing to lose? So what are we willing to lose in our arts communities? What culture, as Maida has talked about, what culture are we willing to lose? The answer will be none. So if the answer is none, then you need to start thinking about what realistically you can do to support your community. That would be a great place to start. What is realistic? Because we all know, like Mary Ellen said, there's a million hats that we're all wearing. But where you can find the time, I know it's possible. Look, we all found the time during COVID, which was a crazy, crazy time, to put resources on our website. I mean, we just did. They were everywhere. So what can you do, to replicate some of those efforts? It could be big, it could be small. But I think asking yourself, what would we be willing to lose, will give you a little bit of a push, in the right direction, having that conversation.
And I just wanted to interject one more thing about NCAPER, the D-Plan Arts Ready online platform, which is a very easy kind of way to get arts groups into emergency preparedness planning. And it's very reasonably priced. I think it's like $59 a year. Some states I know we're subsidizing some 1-year subscriptions. So that can be a good way. And they do webinars on it, a good way to, start this conversation and get our arts organizations thinking about it in kind of small steps.
It looks like Charles from South Arts just posted a nice link up in there for those. Gary,
Yeah, can I
ahead,
illuminate something Emily mentioned earlier, but I want to recast it for this particular question. And thanks for the question. Earlier, Emily, you talked about your role as connecting, a part of your role, connecting surplus and individual artists that needed the assistance, and being a broker, right, between individual artists, arts organizations, and funders who may not be close enough to know those arts organizations and individual artists is another really important role a state arts agency can take on. There may be a national funder who's interested in helping, but they don't have the connections in the community. And it's the state arts agency that can bring together those who need the resources with those who have them. And that was, I'll harken back once more to my post-Katrina life. That was really the most effective way we got money into the hands of artists and organizations, is being that broker. So I could appeal to let's say a foundation interested in funding the performing arts and say, here you go, I've got 50 applications, right, ready to go.
Thank you, Pam. Gary, we're almost at the end, so I'm going to give you last word. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's important to realize that you will not have the capability, the staff capability, the resource capability to solve all these problems. So the best thing you can do is provide the resources to the field, because in the end, especially if you're dealing with FEMA, each organization or each individual is going to have to make their own application. You can't do it for a statewide effort. So providing those resources is the most important thing.
Thank you very much, Gary. It looks like we're out of time. Pam, would you like to wrap us up? If not, I can go ahead and do so.
I'm just going to say thank you. Maybe we both should. Thanks so much to our panelists. Thanks for bringing your energy, your experience, your good thinking to this conversation. And thanks to everyone for joining us. Thank you, Eric, for actually assembling the table.
Thank you, Pam. And I just want to echo the thanks for all the panelists.